Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Emily Murase, member of the National Council of Jewish Women of the International Alliance for Women and a co-founder of
Emily, you're muted.
All right, yes, apologies. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Emily Murase. Happy to be your moderator today as a co-founder of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Trafficking. If everyone could please take a minute.
Did I just disconnect
yourself.
myself? Oh, fuck.
Now, everyone
Wait
needs
a minute. I took my hearing aid out so you could hear because it goes into my ear.
needs to mute themselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be your moderator today as a co-founder of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking, together with Antonia Levine, the executive director, Nancy Goldberg, from many leaders in the community who helped launch that organization. If you are affiliated with SFCAHT, can you raise your hand or raise your hand in the reactions as well? San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. Fantastic. I want to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the International Alliance of Women for Women and National Council of Jewish Women. If you are from IAW, would you give us a wave or raise your hand? From folks from IAW, International Alliance of Women, and then the National Council of Jewish Women. Do we have folks from NCJW in the audience today? Fantastic. All right. Before I introduce our distinguished speakers, I'd like to do an informal poll of the audience, again, by a show of hands. And if you're not on screen, you can use your raise hand function under reactions in the ribbon at the bottom of your screen if you click reactions. We'd like to know how many folks are here from Africa. Where are our friends from Africa? Can you give us a wave, show of hands? Do we have sisters from Asia? Do we have any participants from Asia? Please raise your hand, give us a wave. How about from Australia, Oceania? Anyone from the islands of Australia and Oceania? Please indicate by raising your hand. Next is Europe. Do we have friends from Europe in the audience? Please give us a wave, raise your hand. Thank you for joining us today. What about friends from North America? North Americans, please show us some pride, raise your hand. And let's see, do we have folks from Central and South America? Our sisters from Central and South America, sisters and brothers? Did I miss any country or region? Did I miss any country or region? Well, welcome. Welcome to all of you. Gosh, it's quite a large group today, so we're delighted. It is my great pleasure to introduce our extraordinary panel. Their full biographies are on the back side of our event flyer, and I'm going to ask Antonia to copy the link into the chat. So I will not be spending a lot of time on their biographies, or we would spend our entire time speaking about all of the accomplishments. But I would refer you to our event flyer. So first on our agenda is Anne Pelagio-Yochu. I want to make sure that Anne is here. Is Anne here? Antonia, can you tell me?
Looking for her.
She is connecting from overseas, so she may be having some technical difficulties. So Anne, if you're here, could you raise your hand?
Not here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll then invite our next speaker, Pablo Escribano. He is a regional thematic specialist on migration at the UN International Organization for Migration. He's joining us today from beautiful Costa Rica. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Pablo, please.
Thank you very much, Emily. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay, and I will also show the presentation. I have a quick presentation and I don't think it's going to be very long, but can you see it? Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate at this event. As you said, I work at the International Organization for Migration, and my area of work really is the intersection between migration, environment, and climate change issues, right? And what we're seeing lately is that relation between migration, environment, and climate change really affects lots of area of human mobility, including, unfortunately, trafficking in persons. So what I would like to do over these next 10 minutes is to take you all through a bit of the nexus. What are we seeing as important elements in that nexus between migration and climate change and trafficking in persons? I will focus some of the discussion on Central America because I know there's a lot of interest, in particular from our colleagues in both North America and Central America, but I'll also use examples from other parts of the world. So first of all, I would like maybe to give a very quick and brief mention on Central America, because I do understand that a lot of you in the audience come from the trafficking background, right? And I think it's important to understand how places like Central America are affected by severe climate and environmental hazards, right? So there's been a lot of work and a lot of mentions in the press to the dry corridor of Central America. So we have these areas in the region that are really arid and where there's really issues with rainfall. And the projections that we know and that have been released very recently by the IPCC show that this tendency is likely to increase in the future. And again, this is obviously not only Central America. We know of places in South America, like Northeast Brazil, like Chile, obviously in Africa and the Sahel, they are very arid and where the projections really do not leave a lot of room for optimism for the future. We also have to think, again, in this region, but in others, about the impact of sudden onset hazards, right? And things like hurricanes. In this map on the right, you can see the compounded impact of hurricanes from 1851 to 2009. And you can see how there are areas, in particular, northern Nicaragua and eastern Honduras, but also Belize, that have been affected multiple times by hurricanes. And you can think about the conditions that creates in societies. We know that these hazards have an impact on human mobility. This map here that I'm showing comes from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, and it shows new displacement in 2020. The orange ones are conflict displacement. The blue ones are disaster displacement. So you can see overall in your bottom left that there were 40 new disaster displacement in the year and almost 10 million conflict displacement. So really the sort of first finding of this is that these disasters displace 4 times more people than conflict and violence, right? And you can see while there's a lot of massive displacement in Southeast Asia in particular, we can also have important sets of disaster displacement in the Americas. You can see, for instance, in Honduras, more than 900,000 people displaced. In Guatemala, more than 300,000. This was the year of hurricanes Eta and Iota, which obviously created massive instances of displacement. We also know that climate change will create enhanced pressure on rural areas. There's projections, like the one you can see on your left, that rural areas, in particular where there's subsistence economy and coastal areas, are likely to be very much affected by climate change. And cities, in particular places like Mexico City and Guatemala and the urban areas of Nicaragua, for instance, are or will absorb that rural population. And so this is important when we think about the societal changes that are created by climate change and the sort of movements they entail, right? Movements from rural areas to urban areas, from more exposed areas to the areas that we perceive as safer, even if in sometimes there's also obviously exposure to hazards in urban areas. What we found out as well is that it's crucial to have a gender or to bring a gender lens to human mobility in this context of disaster, environmental migration, degradation, and climate change. This is where sort of the trafficking and vulnerability angle starts to emerge. We know that migration and climate change are gendered process. Women and men and persons of different genders experience climate change very differently in the region, but also in other parts of the world. We know that women, for instance, have less access to land ownership. They have less access to resources. They have less access to sustained livelihoods. And therefore, they're more exposed and vulnerable to climate change. In some places of the region, women are tasked with providing water to the household. And therefore, they're the first to be affected when there's water scarcity. They have to work longer distances. And there's also research around these dynamics in places like Africa. We also know, and it has been studied, that women suffer from acute food insecurity because in many households they're the last ones to receive food. So when there's a food scarcity, they're the ones who will suffer most these situations of food insecurity. The nexus between climate migration and trafficking is still in development, right? But there's important conceptual progress and evidence that I would like to discuss. IOM published some years ago this exploratory study on climate change and human trafficking, which was based in particular in Asia, and which identified that climate change increases the risk of natural disasters, right? We know that with climate change, there will be an increased intensity and frequency of hazards, and then it exacerbates poverty and affects livelihoods. And when we combine that with a mismatch within the demand for labor and supply and unscrupulous recruiter, then you get more prevalence of negative coping strategies. So I think it's important to understand, right, that the basic nexus that emerges is the one in which climate change affects livelihoods. People lose their income. People are put in very vulnerable situations, and that makes them more vulnerable and exposed to trafficking. We know, for instance, when there's emergencies, when there's disaster, that there's an increased prevalence of trafficking in persons, right? So you have to imagine a setting in which a country or a community is affected by a hurricane, is affected by an earthquake, is affected by a severe storm. You get these placed camps, and in this sort of conditions, we can see a proliferation of trafficking because traffickers typically tend to prey on these exposed and vulnerable conditions, right? You have populations who have lost everything. They've lost their valuables, they've lost their homes, they've lost their incomes and their livelihoods, and therefore they can fall prey to false promises and fall prey to trafficking. And that's why it's important, and IOM has been doing that for years, to incorporate counter-trafficking initiatives in displacement settings, right? Most recently in Guatemala, in the volcano eruption in 19, I think it was, we developed a full counter-trafficking campaign, right, to prevent risk of trafficking again, amongst displaced populations. Now, I see that I'm running a bit closer to the time, so I'd like to mention a couple of things that I think are important, right? One important issue to address is how we measure vulnerability and prevalence, right? As I said, this nexus between trafficking, climate, and migration is still being explored, and it's very difficult to say specifically to what extent climate change creates conditions for trafficking. Right? As we know, measuring trafficking prevalence is very complicated due to, in particular, the obvious illegal nature of the crime. And so therefore, it's very difficult to say, right, because there's climate change, there's an increase in trafficking. Those measurements are very complicated. But there's two notions or two concepts that I think can help us a bit. IOM did a study on the UK referral mechanism for victims of trafficking from Albania, Vietnam, and Nigeria. And it found out that limited financial, education, and employment and healthcare services create a mismatch between aspiration and realistic opportunities, which makes people tend to make desperate decisions, driving them into the hands of traffickers. So with everything that we just said about climate change, you can see how climate change exacerbates that mismatch, right? You get communities where livelihoods are lost, you get consistent drought period that affects livelihood and food security. You get hurricanes and sudden onset hazards that destroy standards of living, and therefore you can see how that mismatch between aspiration and living condition is increased with climate change, and how that creates additional exposure to trafficking. So that mismatch, I think, is a crucial part of that nexus that we're exploring today, right? The mismatch that climate change exacerbates between standards of living and aspirations, and that makes people vulnerable to traffickers. And the second concept that I think is crucial, and I will end with this, is the issue of vulnerability. Because measuring vulnerability to trafficking is very complicated. IOM, for instance, has been doing surveys of vulnerability of migrants to different issues like exploitative practices, trafficking, and discrimination, right? And this survey was carried out in 2018 with Venezuelan migrants, right? And we asked them 7 indicators, and you can see that a lot of them had worked in the informal sector. A lot of them had suffered discrimination. Some of them had worked under debt. Some of them had worked without payment, and or have measured positive against labor exploitation indicators. So while this doesn't necessarily translate into trafficking, it does give us a panorama of how migrants can be vulnerable, can suffer vulnerability to indicators that can lead them to trafficking. We know, for instance, obviously, working in the informal sector has a higher vulnerability rate than in the formal sector. We know debt issues are crucial in climate migration. And so all these issues can be included in the relation so that we better understand how climate pressures and displacement are related with human trafficking. So with that, I will finish the presentation. I'm very happy actually to have gone first, because I hope that this sort of provided a sort of initial understanding, and that we can continue to explore in the webinar, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pablo. You covered quite a bit of ground in just under 10 minutes, so we really appreciate that. We did put into the chat links to the reports that Pablo referred to. And in terms of questions for our speakers today, if you could please hold your questions, I will open Q&A after all of the presentations are concluded. And if you would put your name into the chat after I open Q&A, we will call on you to ask your question of a specific speaker. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Anne Pelagio-Yochu, a board member of the International Alliance Women and the director of the WIN Conference Cameroon, who will provide a PowerPoint presentation for her remarks today. Welcome, Anne. Let's see, is Anne unmuted?
Yes, I'm there. Hi, I'm there.
Okay, welcome, Anne. So glad you could make it. Yes. And Anne's going to talk about climate change, the implications of local implications of climate change on migration and human trafficking. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's see, shall we put up the slide, Antonia?
Okay, let me share the screen. Let me share the screen now. Are you getting in? Are you seeing it?
Not yet, it's loading. Antonia, do you have it ready on your end?
Hot tip, and if you open it before you start to share the screen, we'll see it. You can't share the screen and then pull up your list, because that doesn't work every time.
Okay.
So stop sharing the screen, open your presentation, and then share the screen.
Okay, so I have to open my presentation first, then I share the screen.
Actually, yes.
Thank you for that assistance, Allison. While we're waiting to bring up the presentation, I'd like to invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. Feel free to message each other. We will take questions at the conclusion of the presentation. I wonder, Antonia, if you could bring up the presentation.
Anne, stop sharing your screen and I will bring up your presentation. I will share to make it easy for you.
Can I send it in the forum so that you can share it there? You can open it there, because I have a new version.
Already shared it. It's now on the screen, and you can on your first slide, and you can start speaking.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonia. Hi, everyone. I'm very sorry to be late because you know that here in Africa, we always have problem with internet. It's not usually easy for us. So my name is Anne. I'm from Cameroon. I'm a social entrepreneur working for women in empowerment. I've been dedicating my life for more than 18 years to try to bring my own small contribution to build a more just, equal, and inclusive society. So I have the pleasure, the honor to present this paper on the consequences of climate change and natural disaster on women. So this is a plan of my presentation. Next slide, please, Antonia.
Just a moment, I have problem.
Yeah. So the plan of our presentation, I will first of all have an introduction, then I will share some perspective, and then I will end with a conclusion. And in that conclusion, I will talk about what we have as perspective to help women to be more able to adapt and adjust to the effect of climate change. And I will also share some information with you people. Thank you very much. Next slide, please.
Is that the correct slide?
The next one, yes, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. As I was trying to say, what I understand by climate change and natural disaster and the causes. Climate change is a long-term change in the average weather pattern that have come to define at local, regional, and global climates. These human-produced temperature increases are commonly referred to as global warming. Climate change has also been connected with other damaging weather events such as more frequent and more intense floods, downpour, and winter storm. These are some causes of climate change that is actually a war, human versus nature. Some of the causes we have like greenhouse gases, reflectively of or absorption of the sun energy. We also have changes in the Earth's orbit and rotation, variation in solar activities, changes in the Earth reflectivity, volcanic activity, changes in naturally occurring carbon dioxide concentration. Rich countries, including the United States, Canada, Japan, and much of Western Europe, account for just 12% of the global population today, but are responsible for 50% of all the planet warming greenhouse gases released from fossil fuel and industry of the past 170 years. Natural disasters are catastrophic events with atmospheric, geological, and hydrological origin. Example, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, landslides that can fatalities, property damage, and social environment disruption. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, the first part of my presentation, I would like to share some effect of climate change and natural disaster on rural women in Cameroon, my country. Climate change and natural disaster have major impact on the food security in the livelihood of smallholders farmers in Africa, especially in Cameroon, where rural women are always fighting climate change to survive in their communities when they don't decide to migrate to different places in order to find safe shelters. Environmental migration is coming to be a great issue in Cameroon, as we are seeing the number of women affected by the climate change and environmental degradation in general. Let's have a look at the international level before coming back to Cameroon. According to the World Bank, by 2050, climate change could turn 1,040 million people into internal migrants. The experience of climate change is filtered through one, existing cultural, social, and economic vulnerabilities. The rural poor in natural resources dependent community in various African countries are likely to be negatively affected by climate change. In many cultures, female farmers are considerably worse off than their male counterparts. In Cameroon, this illustration is visible almost in the 10 regions of my country. If I can put some figure here, I can say that even though we don't have official data, that is another problem to solve. We estimate about 20% of women in local communities from the region seriously affected by climate change and natural disaster that will migrate to other regions and even other countries. The most affected region in my country are the Northwest, the West, the Southwest, that will cause the migration of women to neighboring regions like West region and even out of the country, with many of them going to Nigeria and Chad, for instance. Next slide, please. The life and income that will migrate to Nigeria. Far north also, where women will leave their communities because of floods and overheat to go and look for other safe places where they can be farming and get food, such as Nigeria and Chad, as I was saying. The life and incomes of rural women in Cameroon depend at least about 90% on their agricultural activity. So when the climate is not really in their favor, actually, and in case of a natural disaster due mostly to the environment degradation, the first idea that comes to people's mind is to relocate, to change the environment. The number of internal climate migrants keep increasing in my country, Cameroon, and the situation is really critical, as we have report on all the risks we can imagine on their itinerary, especially women, rape, various life-threatening. Secondary effects of climate change and natural disaster in my country include also displacement, as mentioned above, agricultural income risk, loss of livelihood, weakened government, and in some cases, political instability and conflict, just like the one that we have now in the Anglophone region. Migration in response to climate impact may range from mobility as a proactive adaptation strategy to force displacement in the face of life-threatening risks. From what I see on the field, climate change in Cameroon leads actually to increased food insecurity and larger health risks. Finally, increasing resources scarcity, especially water, and this leads to civil unrest and allocative conflict in many local areas and grassroots community. Now we'll go to the second part of my presentation, where I will talk about some perspective. How do we think that we can stop human climate change? First thing, to speak up. People have to speak up about the issue. Secondly, power your home with renewable energy. Then third, weatherize. Number 4, invest in energy efficient appliance. Number 5, reduce water waste. Actually, number 6, actually eat the food you buy and makes less of it meat. Buy better bulbs, pull the plugs. Some local action taken by our organization in Cameroon here. We have been for more than 15 years today, a part of our activities regarding women empowerment. That is very important to us, because we really believe that the economic empowerment of women is something that is very important. If we really want to build an equal, inclusive society, we have to push the economic empowerment of women forward. So regarding the climate change, we keep on the field working with women to strengthen their resilience through indigenous leadership. That is, we are going in the villages, we work with rural women in their grassroots community to train them how they can waste, how they can reduce their waste, how they can do to better adapt and to be resilient to the effect of the climate change. And another activity that we are taking on the field with the rural women, innovative solution for women and girls, and the move by assisting and protecting them in the context of climate change, environmental degradation, and disaster due to natural hazard. We provide foods, we go to refugees camp, or even in the village where they migrate, we provide food, clothes, healthcare, useful information, and shelters. Now, what can be done as global action to take by all parties at the international level? Combat the growing and disproportionate impact of the climate emergency on the most vulnerable country and communities, such as like Cameroon, in particular, those displaced and their hosts. At the global level, there is also a need to support vulnerable countries and communities in their effort to rapidly scale up prevention and prepared measures to avert, minimize, and address displacement. This is an urgent, next slide, this is really an urgent, I'm not seeing my screen. We have a problem. I'm not getting my screen anymore. Then I will continue. Yeah.
The audience can see your screen.
Yes. Oh, okay. Okay. But me, I don't know what is happening with my computer. So I will continue with my paper. So I was trying to say that another action that can be taken at the global level is to support vulnerable countries and community in their effort to rapidly scale up prevention and prepared measures to avert, minimize, and address displacement. This is an urgent need to adopt new approaches in aiding those displaced by natural disaster and climate change, not only in Cameroon, but worldwide. My conclusion now will be to say that climate change is the defining crisis of our time, and disaster displacement, one of its most devastating consequences. Entire populations are already suffering the impact, but vulnerable people living in some of the most fragile and conflict-affected countries are often disproportionately affected. The climate crisis is a human crisis. It is driving displacement and makes life harder for those already forced to flee. Some key actions are to develop solutions for people to move by managing migration in the context of climate change, environmental degradation, and disaster due to natural hazard. Develop solutions for people on the move by assisting and protecting migrants and the displaced person in the context of the climate change. Develop solutions for people to stay by building their resilience and addressing the adverse climatic and environmental drivers that can compel people to move, making migration a choice. I will finally conclude with a declaration of Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who need to invest now in preparedness to mitigate future protection needs and prevent further climate-caused displacement. Waiting for disaster to strike is not an option. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Anne, for your very, very compelling presentation.
So now I will now have a small word to end my presentation. At the beginning, I was talking about some initiative that we are carrying out right now, because of the crisis in the Anglophone region of Cameroon, there are so many internally displaced people, especially women and children. So right now in Cameroon, we are carrying out a fundraising activity to collect funds to put in place in Cameroon the first shelter to rescue battered women in my country. So we have been doing this activity for more than 2 months. So we would like some people to get involved. So I will send you the document about the project. I will share it with you in the discussion page so that people can know more about the project. And those who would like to have more information can get in touch with me by email. I will send all information now in the group, in the discussion page. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us from Cameroon with these very important information. I just want to thank you for giving your presentation in English and not in your native language of French for those of us who are monolingual. Thank you so much, Anne. So just a reminder, we will open up the Q&A at the end of the presentations. Once I open Q&A, please put your name in the chat and I will call on you, but that will be later in the program. Next, we have Hira Zahir, who will be speaking on supporting survivors of human trafficking and migration resulting from climate change. She is a program manager of the Employer Empower program of the Three Strands Global Foundation. She's joining us today from San Francisco. Hira.
You guys hear me? Yes, no? Okay, cool. So my name is Hera, and I am the San Francisco Program Manager for the Employ Plus Empower program for Three Strands Global Foundation. We're an anti-trafficking nonprofit that has multiple programs from education to direct client services. Our Employ Plus Empower program provides these direct client services with a trauma-informed care approach that is collaborative case management based to remove barriers for an individual so that they're successful in our workforce development program, which means that they're able to obtain and retain employment as well as get connected to education programs and complete them. For the services that we do not provide, such as housing, legal, or mental health, we actually refer individuals to partnering orgs that are able to.
Hey, Hera,
Yes.
we have a request to speak a little bit slower because we have English as a second language folks. in the
Oh,
room.
definitely. I apologize. So for the services that we do not provide, such as housing, legal, or mental health, we refer out to our partnering organizations and collaborate with those teams to ensure that the individuals are having a well-rounded team of services. If a client needs us to be on those calls, we're there with them. Our program focuses on job readiness training, getting work authorizations for individuals if they don't have them, securing transportation to and from jobs and schools, getting individuals connected to trainings and certification programs, as well as employment and higher education. If an individual does not have their high school diploma, we connect them with GED programs and help them, each step of the way. We also help them with education, which can include touring college campuses, taking an individual shopping for interview or work clothes. And our program was actually created in response to feedback that we received from individuals that had experienced exploitation and the need for individualized support with their unique situations. And we greatly do believe it takes a village. During our time in San Francisco, we're actually seeing an increase of displaced individuals that have been victims of trafficking or are at an increased risk to be trafficked. Currently, I'm working with many youth and adults of all statuses, such as undocumented, legal migrants, and US citizens that were displaced due to disasters that have been caused by climate change. These undocumented youth and these individuals have come to be known as climate migrants or climate refugees, and some of them are undocumented youth and families who were displaced due to fires in Brazil, the hurricanes that destroyed many parts of Nicaragua and Honduras, as well as Guatemala, massive floods in Southeast Asia, and droughts that have taken over many different parts of Africa. These are just examples of disasters that are due to these extreme weather patterns from climate change that have led to these individuals being trafficked into the US with promises of better lives. Unfortunately, in our program, many of the barriers we are encountering are the need for mental health resources from the trauma the individuals have endured, and then getting them connected to legal assistance for immigration help, language assistance to learn English, because a lot of them are monolingual language speakers from their native countries, as well as housing referrals to get the individuals or families under a roof. Many of them are homeless right now and live in shelters. We also help them with getting documents to be able to work, getting them connected to medical care, and getting them the education resources that they're looking for. Many of these individuals are extremely high needs because they've had so much happen to them, but they also have no means to survive in the city. And as many people have heard, San Francisco is an extremely expensive city and one of the most expensive ones in the United States. So this is just creating another cycle of them for potentially getting exploiting further because they may not even have access to any economic resources. And so, sometimes our initial phone call is the first time they're hearing that someone can help them get connected to all the resources, because they may, sometimes there's instances where we can't actually get them the help that they may need, and they may get deported or may have a lot of unprocessed trauma, which prevents them from actually moving forward to retain a job or be successful in education. And, what I'm seeing a lot of right now is I'm getting a lot of new referrals that are in removal process proceedings, but that are, have been displaced due to the hurricanes that happened in Nicaragua and Honduras. So what we're trying to do right now is get some of them connected to legal resources. Many of them are homeless, so housing, getting them clothing and food needs, and mental health resources. One of my referrals, actually, as previously mentioned by Pablo about the hurricanes, they are from Nicaragua, were trying to migrate, got trafficked in Mexico, escaped into the US, were caught, while crossing the border and now are in removal proceedings. And we're just trying to see if we can get them connected to resources as well as some sort of status so that they can actually have employment and create a better life for their families. I do want to also point out this doesn't happen to immigrants and undocumented individuals, but also US citizens. I have encountered many youth and adults that have been displaced and trafficked due to the wildfires here in California or from the massive hurricanes that have hit the East Coast, such as Hurricane Katrina. With the immense number of the climate change-induced disasters that we are experiencing, the numbers are just increasing of individuals that we're working with who've been exploited due to displacement. Many of these individuals are not even aware that there are resources out there to help prevent exploitation or further exploitation. This is why it's super imperative for international forums such as these to exist and give a voice to organizations that are able to provide services that, you know, so that they're able to reach individuals that need assistance, but also so that everyone's aware of our existence and are able to help stabilize and support the individuals in their job and education goals. And if you guys would like, I can put our website and my email in the chat if you guys wanted to connect later. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to introduce Judge Susan Briel, who serves on the California Superior Court in San Francisco and chairs the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. Judge Briel.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you everyone who has logged on and shown such interest today. I am a judge in the San Francisco Superior Court. I've been a judge for a little over 20 years. I've had many assignments, but I also handle a special court that involves children vulnerable to human trafficking. And it really is a collaborative court. As Jennifer said, we can't do it alone. There are a lot of partners, advocates, attorneys, social workers, child protective service workers, and we all work together as a team to help the survivors of trafficking. And what I've seen over the many years of being a judge and handling cases of human trafficking is the following. Extreme weather conditions do cause vulnerable people to migrate around the globe and does cause them to be at risk for both labor and sexual exploitation. Intense heat waves and drought have drastically impacted the livelihoods of farmers who have depended on agriculture to survive. And such impacts have caused an increase in human migration for climate refugees. And a few of these climate refugees have ended up in my own courtroom in San Francisco as undocumented trafficked youth, several who started out as part of a wave of migration. They soon found themselves kidnapped, raped, and exploited by human traffickers. Others were trafficked from their own homes, where global warming certainly impacted the extreme poverty of their families. The trauma these young people suffer when they are found by child protective services, their physical, psychological, and social isolation is often so debilitating that I have seen one case of a young person unable to speak. Often a trafficked youth has no extended family to turn to here in the United States. They have no safe home. And like so many homeless, trafficked youth right here and born right here in the United States, they continue to be sexually and commercially exploited or continue to engage in the commercial activities of their exploiters they are reluctant to name. We know from many studies from the National Institute of Justice that homeless youth, non-citizen youth, and citizen youth alike are especially vulnerable to human trafficking. If we have a young person who has run away from home, a home facing severe weather conditions, such as the conditions on the East Coast of the United States this past winter, many such runaway youth often unwittingly end up taking refuge with traffickers. Global warming is also a fact of life right here in the United States. And what we need to do is the following. We need more housing of all youth, not just runaway shelters, not just homeless shelters, but actual families to open up their homes to these young survivors. We need more judges around the United States to be trained on how to handle U visas and T-visa certification requests for non-citizen trafficked youth who have suffered exploitation, not to mention the egregious effects of climate change. And we need to educate young people in schools here in the United States about climate change, about root causes of homelessness, about healthy relationships, and about resistance to all forms of commercial and sexual exploitation. Finally, I think we need to recognize the worldwide connection between climate change, migration, and vulnerable populations who end up being exploited both outside the United States and right here at home. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Judge Brill. People should know that Judge Brill spends a lot of time during the year training other judges across the country about these very important issues impacting youth and human trafficking. So next, I'm delighted to introduce Antonia Levine, founder and executive director of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. She also serves as treasurer of the International Alliance of Women. She's going to speak about multidisciplinary approaches and interagency collaboration to fight human trafficking. Antonia.
Emily, thank you so much. Great presentation so far. And we heard from many of our speakers representing different fields of approaching the issue of human trafficking. We heard from them how important it is to work together, to apply multidisciplinary approach in our work. Collaboration is key, no question. Why is collaboration so important in the field of fighting human trafficking? It's because the philosophy behind our action requires as critical to empower the survivors of human trafficking. Why do we need them empowered? Of course, we need them empowered because of the human rights aspect of our work, assisting people that are vulnerable, due to vulnerability, fell into the hands of traffickers and were terribly traumatized and removed from the normal everyday life and integration in the community. This is one of our reasons. But our second reason is to help prosecute the traffickers. Without empowered survivor willing to cooperate, not necessarily to testify, but to provide some information, so we have the opportunity to rescue so many others trapped in human trafficking, we would not be successful without such survivor. So this two-pronged approach is the philosophy behind our work together, because empowering a survivor requires, as somebody mentioned, a village. We need to work together with the medical professionals, with the labor departments of our governments, the consulates when immigrants are involved, especially in the case of migration due to climate change and natural disasters. We need help from educators. We need to work together with the law enforcement on all levels, and we need international collaboration, because so many cases of human trafficking are transnational. They involve more than one country, and that is why we involve in our work more than one consulates. They are members of the collaborative and they contribute to informing our community here about regulations against human trafficking and the community abroad. Of course, this involves also collaboration between the law enforcement and the service providers. And as both Jennifer and Hara mentioned, such collaboration actually makes possible to heal the survivors, to bring them back to ability to reintegrate in the community and to make them willing not only to help, but to become leaders in the anti-trafficking movement. All speakers here know that in San Francisco, we have the survivors leaders on a key role, helping to organize the work of the San Francisco Collaborative, advising us on daily basis. We have all these fields represented by organizations, law enforcement, government departments in the over 60 membership of the collaborative. This is our example. This is the good practice that we want to share with all of you. And please reach out. We posted earlier and I will repost our contact information and the website of the San Francisco Collaborative. Be part of our community, be voice for the survivors of human trafficking, and be part of the movement against human trafficking, the global movement to stop this terrible crime. Thank you so much again. Emily, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Antonia. There's so many examples of collaboration here in San Francisco to overcome the challenges of human trafficking. Just a couple of people I want to acknowledge. Linda Kurtz has joined us from the National Council of Jewish Women. She is the president. Mary Steiner of the United Nations Association of San Francisco, who has put together a San Francisco series. We will put into the chat a flyer about additional sessions about the innovative work we are doing here in San Francisco. So now I would like to open up the chat for Q&A. If you do have a question, please put your name into the chat and we will try to find you to unmute you so that you may ask your question. Please direct your question to a specific speaker so that we can get through as many questions as possible. Let's see. I see Allison Brown has a question for Anne.
Hi, Anne. Your lecture was very long. However, I missed the one aspect of trafficking. How many cases of trafficking do you get in your area having to do with women who have been driven from their homes by the conflict and the climate crisis? Or once they leave, do you not hear about them again and you don't know what happened?
All right, Anne. Is Anne still with us?
Yes, she's here. Anne, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. I forgot that I mute myself. Yes, I was saying that regarding the internally displaced women, what we do is that we work with them in the place, in their shelter, when they find a new safe place to stay. What we do, we go on the field, we work with them. Usually they need clothes, they need food, they need some information on how they can do to stay well where they find a new shelter. We don't abandon them. What we do is that we work with them and we also try to involve even the government to come and support the women where they went and they find a refuge for themselves and for their children.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne.
So when they leave, I wanted to ask something. When they leave their place, like the one that we have now in Yaoundé, they are from the northwest and southwest region of Cameroon. They ran away from there because of the Anglophone crisis. Because in our country here, we have been facing that crisis for more than 5 years today. we have all the Anglophone region. They want to separate from the country. They want to have their independence. So that is a fact that is causing too many internal displaced. So women came from the Northwest and the Southwest. They are here in Yaoundé. And the place where you can find those women, some women are hosts in some churches and even in some NGOs, like in our organization right now, we have 3 women that we are keeping with 6 children. So they have some space, some places where we can easily find them, but most of them are on the street. To tell you the truth, that is the reality. They are on the street, most of them, and especially young girls. They are forced to do prostitution on the street because they are looking for food to eat. That's why we actually want to put in place that project, because in my country, nothing, there is nothing like a strategy, a global strategy to really solve that problem. Even before the crisis in my country, women have been always victim of domestic violence or even violence due to the displacement, but we don't have here in our country a shelter where women can go and stay for some time before looking for a better place for their. So our project is something that will really be some innovation that will really solve a problem, at least for women that are coming from all those areas and stay here in Yaoundé. The project will really solve a problem. That's why we really want to put in place that project. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison, for that question. Next is Jocelyn Scott for Judge Briel. Jocelyn, if you could please unmute and ask your question of Judge Briel.
Thank you. It was also to Jennifer Wang, if I may, Emily. I've actually got three issues. One is, what measures are there to stop women being deported when they've been subjected to trafficking? Because the only way that one can prosecute those who are engaging in the trafficking is if the women are there to be witnesses. And the problem in the United Kingdom and in Australia is that too often the government simply deports the women and therefore they're not there to be witnesses so that the traffickers can actually be convicted. That's number one. Now, number two is, what about the issue of those who are trafficked themselves engaging in crime? I mean, an easy one is, say that somebody's trafficked and they're trafficked specifically for the purpose of engaging in growing marijuana. Now, one can see that's the purpose of trafficking. They're inevitably caught up in growing marijuana. And therefore, in the United Kingdom, there's a provision where you could use a defence that they've been trafficked for that purpose. But what about women who are trafficked for sexual exploitation, and then they get forced into a position of actually supporting the sexual exploitation of other women? Are there provisions to cover that? And then the third point is, I was very interested in Judge Briel's education of those in the judiciary and so on. Way back in 1977, the Women's Electoral Lobby in Australia proposed that provision should be put into rape law when it was changed to say that compulsory education should take place of any judges who are working in the field, barristers and counsel attorneys and so on. And interestingly, 40 years later, last year, Canada brought in a provision in their sexual offences law to that effect. But with the education you do, Judge Briel, is it simply that they want to engage in the education, or is there some compulsory requirement? Because to wind up, one of the problems is you bring in a law and none of the judges who are putting the law into effect were at law school when that law was introduced. Therefore, they've never been trained in it, and they need mandatory training. So is it mandatory, or is it just that they voluntarily say they'll be educated by you and your good officers, Judge Briel? Thank you.
Well, those are a lot of questions, and I'll start with the last question about training. All new judges are mandated to go to Judges College in California and to do a certain amount of training. I think that California, and I do a lot of training nationally, sometimes internationally, but as far as national training goes, I think California does have some of the best education for judges in the country. We are also mandated to do continuing education. Every 3 years, we have to report the number of hours of continued education. We are mandated in Judges College to do a course on domestic violence, but right now, no one is mandated to do a course on human trafficking. So I know the National Council of Jewish Women has wanted trafficking to be part of a judge's education up front, and hopefully it will be. But there is a lot of mandatory continuing education a judge does. And I am a member of the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and we train judges around the country on issues of domestic violence and human trafficking, sexual assault. As far as people in removal proceedings or deportation proceedings, in the United States, there are, I think it's important for anyone who is undocumented or a non-citizen to have an immigration attorney. I make sure that the non-citizen adults and youth in my courtroom get an immigration attorney, get appointed or hire an immigration attorney if they can afford to hire an immigration attorney, and usually they cannot. And the immigration attorney can apply for continued presence in the United States. The immigration attorney will then present to me one of the documents I was mentioning before, something called a U visa certification request or a T visa certification request. Both of these, if signed by me and if I make certain findings, enables the non-citizen to remain in the US and to help with and cooperate in the investigation of the trafficker. Helpfulness is, I could give a 5-hour talk on what it means to be helpful in the detection, investigation, prosecution, or sentencing of someone who is a trafficker. But trafficking is one of the enumerated crimes that allows me to make findings and sign one of these U visa certification requests. So I think it's very different than in the United Kingdom. I don't know if you have this, but we do have these provisions that will allow someone to stay in the United States if they are a victim of certain enumerated crimes, and they're helpful in the detection of, say, human trafficking. Of course, it's very hard for survivors to point fingers at their abuser. It's much like domestic violence. So if you look at the totality of the circumstances, I think being helpful is just calling 911 for help. 911 is our emergency line for help. I think being helpful is asking for a protective order from a family court or a dependency court. So there's all sorts of ways that a survivor can be helpful and then get a judge to sign one of these certification requests, which is the first step towards getting lawful permanent residency for the non-citizen. But again, judges need to be educated about this process and about their obligation, really, and their mandate to sign these requests when presented to them.
Emily, I would like to give just a quick remark on deportation. In many cases, we have to remember that in many cases, actually, deportation is the good measure for a certain victim, survivor of human trafficking. If we are unable to provide the same resources and support to that victim locally in the United States or in any other country of destination. The important, though, the key moment here is this evaluation to be made in collaboration with victims advocates and service providers, not singularly and only by the law enforcement. We need really to look deep into the case to make sure that in the country of origin, this person will receive better support by the family and the service providers, and also to make sure that there is no danger to that particular survivor in case of deportation. We need always to look at the survivor's opinion on that and collaborate with them. So this is how deportation looks. This is how we try to approach the issue in San Francisco and Bay Area.
So I have quite a queue of questions. Next will be Dr. Kenneth Nassau for Anne, and then I have Rachel Brasso, Fatima Salier, Mary Steiner, Marian Boker, and Camila Wagner. I hope that we can get through all of these questions. So if you could be brief in your question and your response. Dr. Kenneth.
Thank you so much, Anne, for your very rich presentation and the work that you are doing. I can first of all confirm a lot of the things you say because I come from Anglophone Cameroon. And so I have family and other close people who are victims of this war, including the girls on the streets in Douala and Yaoundé. So I wanted to ask just two quick questions with the work you are doing, because I know my research has been around environmental concerns in the Congo Basin, including Cameroon, and climate change. I'm wondering, because in these countries, there is not a lot of media attention given to environmental and climate change issues, and also the nexus with migration and internal displacement. So I was wondering, what are you doing within your organization to bring more visibility to the work that you are doing, and also in the hope of being able to inspire other people to do similar work across the country and neighboring places? That's question one. Then question two is also like, how are you practically leveraging on your work to be able to work together with internally displaced persons from the Anglophone war in order to fight climate change and environmentalism or environmental degradation in Yaoundé, in Douala, in around the country, especially given the fact that we have the Lake Chad Basin, which is shrinking. We also have the Congo Basin, which is under a lot of threats. So how are you addressing that with your people? Thank you.
And Anne, if you could limit your response to 1 minute, we want to get through all of the questions. And you will need to unmute. And are you able to unmute? I think Anne is having some difficulty. Maybe we'll come back to that. I want to jump to a question for Pablo, Mary Steiner. Mary, do you have a question for Pablo? If you could please unmute, you need to.
Hello, are you getting me?
Okay, we'll go back to Anne first and then.
Please, I unmute myself. Yes, I was trying to reply to the question of Dr. Kenneth. I was trying to say that what we are doing here in Cameroon, we are not working alone, Dr. Pablo. We are part of several network of women organizations here in Cameroon. We work with the government, with local authorities, with traditional rulers. We work also with the beneficiary women on the grassroots in communities. For instance, in the Anglophone region, we have been working in the Momo division in Bangui with women, internal displaced women that came out from Bangui and come and stay in Bamenda. And for those that are coming here in Yaoundé, they have focal point that is recommending us to those when they come to Yaoundé, they come into our office, and the one that we can bring a solution to their case, we try to do so. And when it is above us, we send them to the Ministry of Women Empowerment, that is also having a program to help and rescue those internal displaced women. And regarding the information about what we are doing, we always involve media. All our activity are really broadcast by media. We have a special program in the radio, on the TV, to let people know what we are doing so that our action can also inspire others, and so that we can always work with other people to raise awareness about the issue. I hope I try to answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Dr. Kenneth. Next is Mary Steiner. You have a question for Pablo.
Yes, Pablo, hello. Thank you for representing the UN. What agencies of the UN serve survivors or serve women who and girls and children who are vulnerable to being trafficked? And how can they be empowered to fight climate change?
Pablo, if you could please
Yes.
unmute yourself. Great.
Thank you very much for that question, Mary. So in terms of the UN, I guess different agencies have different mandates, right? And I would think, or as you know, UNICEF, for instance, provides increased attention to the situation of children. IOM has been working on counter trafficking for many decades. I think we breached some years ago the mark of 100,000 traffic victims assistant. We have established a data collaborative on counter trafficking because we have the largest database of trafficked victims, which we're handling obviously with all the data protection principles. We do activities in counter trafficking across the 3 Ps of persecution, prevention, and protection. And we work also with colleagues, for instance, from UNODC on the more sort of law enforcement angle, right? So I think that there's a good collaboration between UN agencies on these issues, and in particular in IOM, we do have a very strong role to play. On your second question on how the contribution of migrants to fight climate change can be addressed, I think there's obviously plenty of events that discuss this over these 2 weeks, but I think it's important. I think your question is crucial because we often talk about the vulnerability of women to climate change, but we also have to think about their potential contribution and differentiated contribution, right? And we know in the regions, for instance, there are very strong women organizations that foster climate adaptation in places like Nicaragua, like Jamaica. We have very good examples of places like Cuba, where the integration of women in disaster risk reduction really has yielded great positive results. So I think, and obviously the answer would require another webinar, right? But women leadership is crucial in climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Bridging gaps in terms of ownership and resources are crucial parts of the answer. And thank you very much for your question again, Mary.
So we're going to have to close the Q&A with apologies to Marian. Thank you so much for coming and participating. We could have many additional sessions on these topics, but we appreciate your participation today.